It's the Brad and John Show.
It is the Brad and John Show. This is Block A. Date today is December 2nd, 2024. And, John, I want to start off the show with something that's directed right at you.
Ooh, I can't wait.
For all the times you've made snide remarks to me and kidded about my little Debbie's addiction and kidded about the fact that I'm not the most organized guy and I don't necessarily have all these plans and things that I do you don't approve of. You know what, John?
What's that, Brad?
I hereby pardon you.
Oh, thank you, Brad. This is very patriarchal of you.
Patriarchal. So, once again, we have President Biden, who has repeatedly said he won't pardon his son, who pardoned his son yesterday. John, your opinion on this already?
Well, why wouldn't you? I mean, imagine what happens if he doesn't pardon Hunter.
Well, what happens? Are you talking that they're going to dig into his past and all the creation of the money that goes to all the Biden family and his grandkids and stuff like that?
Yes, of course.
Oh, okay. Well, the interesting thing is, I don't know if you heard the top of the hour news. They said that the reason that Biden pardoned him is because the prosecution was biased, only because, I think the exact quote was, only because it's his son. Now, John, let me think about this for a minute. If you didn't pay how many $1 million worth of income taxes, and if you had gone to the gun shop and lied on a form, and matter of fact, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, I have to look into this, I believe that when Trump left office in 2021, because that's you're elected in the odd and even years, and you're actually sworn in the office in the odd years. When he left office in 2021, didn't he pardon a rapper who did the exact same thing? Wasn't there a rapper that got thrown in jail because of the fact that he bought a gun and he said that he'd never been was not addicted to drugs or anything like that? Wasn't it the same thing?
I think it's the exact same thing. I mean, I would be, if I did those things, I could rely on the old 3 hots and a cot, right? Well, I know that I would be in the clink.
Well, you know what? You get to a point, and look, this is not Biden bashing right off the beginning of the show, but you get to a point where Joe Biden for the past 50 years has led a sheltered life. Okay, let's be honest. He's led a sheltered life. You've worked in D.C., I have not. Remember, I interned there for 2 months, but I've never worked in D.C. Well, but you were there for a while, okay? And in 2 months, you probably absorbed some of the idiosyncrasies and the day-to-day flow of how things work,
sure,
correct?
Yeah.
Right. And don't you think those people are very insulated for the most part?
Oh, of course so. Yeah. And that you become more insulated as the more years that you spend there, of course.
Right. It just gets to the point where, I don't want to go.
It sounds like you need a little time on a Delaware beach, man. You need a vacation. You need to pardon your sons for all the dirt bike violations they had in the 1990s.
My oldest son, matter of fact, I don't know if I told you that, one time he got arrested. And I'll be honest, I'll tell the story. He got arrested, and the arrest just plain out sucked. He really did. And to the point where I fought it I think I told this story one time before, for like a year and a half. And finally, one day, the court administrator calls me up and he said, you know what, since you've been very persistent with this, and he says, I took a good look at this, and he says, I think you're right. I don't think this was a proper prosecution. I'm dropping the case. I'm expunging the record. It's like it never happened. And I've thought to myself, for once in my life, I was able to fight City Hall, right? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do know.
Okay, that is John Combest. You check out his website, COMBEST. You put John on the front, you put a .com on the back end, and you get johncombest.com. Every single day for the past 23 plus years, he's put together a list of all the important things you should know about what's going on in the Missouri area as far as politics and news and sometimes goofy stuff, but mainly, sort of interesting things that you probably should know about as a citizen of the Show Me State. But what we do on these mornings, we bring in this guy.
I'm Casey Kasem.
And we count him down, right, Casey?
Now on with the countdown.
And he starts off with...
In third place.
Our first story, Brad, is one that combines two of your favorite things, and that is a disruptor and also eating lunch. You love both those things, don't you, Brad?
I do.
You're a disruptor who eats Little Debbie's, and I make snide comments about it. But go down to Springfield. Our friend Garett Bowles at KWTO had a state representative on, a gentleman named Darin Chappell. Darin was first elected back in 2022, so he's going into his sophomore year. And Brad, he is a disruptor's disruptor. If you were to listen to a state legislative interview, you should listen to this one, because Darin talks about how when he got there as a freshman, he was told to sit down and shut up. He said that's verbatim what somebody told him. Darin also goes on to tell some stories about what it was like being a freshman in the legislature. And he talks specifically, Brad, about the fact that there was a Democrat that everybody was scared of, a guy named Peter Meredith. Peter Meredith was termed out. So Peter Meredith left the Missouri House after this past election. And Darin talks about the fact that every other Republican was scared of Peter Meredith, said, you don't go up against him. But Darin did. And according to Darin, he called him out on the floor of the Missouri House. Also, Darin points out that his Republican colleagues didn't all come into the House as well prepared as he was. He also talks about the fact that some people who were there for a long time don't know the Constitution as well as he does. He talks about a guy that's becoming a state senator, a guy named Mike Henderson from down in Bonne Terre. He says Mike Henderson doesn't, I think the verbatim quote is that he's a super, super nice guy, but the Constitution is not his strong suit. And Darin talks a little bit about being able to try to help Mike Henderson out. Mike Henderson didn't comprehend, Darin's level of knowledge about the Constitution and debating. So Darin was able to help out on the floor of the House in his first ever floor debate, Brad. And in fact, I linked to a video of that first floor debate so people can see. Oh, and let's get to lunch real quick, too. The verbatim quote was that for a while, Peter Meredith was eating this Republican's lunch. He was eating his lunch. But then Darin Chappell got on the microphone, and Darin Chappell ate the Democrats' lunch. He said he ate Representative Kevin Windham's lunch. And then we end, Brad. Garett does a great job of leading Representative Chappell through this discussion. Shout out to Garett. And we end. Darin has a challenge. He says, quote, "I would love for somebody to be dumb enough to challenge me on the House floor on camera. I will eat their lunch and enjoy every second of it."
Wow.
A lot of lunch is being eaten on the floor of the Missouri House, Brad.
He should join the MMA. He should be in UFC. Hey, you come on in the ring or come in the octagon. I'll take you on, right?
Yeah, you know what? But that's a disruptor spirit, isn't it? And, and Darin talks a little bit about the fact that he was told to be quiet, and he was told that nobody can challenge somebody who's been around. So it's a good reminder of when you have a disruptor that, people should pay homage. People should think about the wit and wisdom coming from a freshman and how much they can learn, Brad.
Can I give you a different read on this?
Sure.
Okay, here's the read I have on this is that the fact that once upon a time there were no term limits, and you could have somebody like, what was it, like in Illinois, you had Madigan who was in there for like 40 years or something like that. Oh, yeah,
good old Mikey Madigan.
Right, Mike Madigan. Okay, and there were some guys in Missouri as well, too, that were long. Look at the federal government. You've got, people in there. Well, look at Joe Biden. He was senator for how long? You got senators been in there for 4 and 5 and 6 terms, and the terms are 6 years. Okay, so that was supposed to end when we put in term limits, but yet even with the essentially shorter span of the careers mandated to be 8 years for a rep or 8 years for a senator, they're still pulling this, hey, I'm a big dude and I've been here for a while and you're a rookie? Don't you think that's sort of funny?
Yeah, and so here's the thing. If you believe that those conversations actually take place, if you're inclined to believe that someone actually told Darin Chappell to sit down and shut up, like if you take that at face value, then you probably believe that actually happened, yeah.
You don't believe it? You think he's making this up?
Oh, I didn't say that at all. I would just suggest I find it hard to believe that a member of the Missouri House would tell one of his colleagues, sit down and shut up. I think that would, be said that that's conventional wisdom or something. But, if you're inclined to believe a story, then believe the story.
Okay, now, and you didn't, and I missed it. Was this a podcast or was this an interview?
This is, Garett has a show that runs on Saturdays and Sundays on KWTO. He also talks about the fact that I believe it was the University of Maryland had a class on fat studies, Brad, and the intersectionality between anti-black racism and being fat, which, by the way, it goes back and forth on whether or not you could say fat. Spoiler, we're going to talk about oinkers in story number one. But Garett does a great job of, he does kind of like what you do, Brad. He keeps an eye on national stories and then brings some wacky stuff into the cultural discussion. You can hear Garett on Saturdays and Sundays on KWTO. As always, Brad, I have the timestamps to Garett show up on my website today.
When I used to work in Springfield, and I ran my traffic network down there for a while in Springfield, Missouri, and I used to love listening to KWTO because they had a promo and they had this guy, and he had this really sort of like very serious voice, and he'd talk about this is what KWTO does for the community, and you go through this whole thing, and he says at the very end, he says, that's why our name, our call letters are what we do. We're the station that's keep watching the Ozarks, KWTO. And I thought that was a really good line.
Yeah, it's brilliant. And by the way, I believe at 7:20 today, I believe Scott Faughn is on talking about the 12 days of DEI Christmas. He's put together a whole program where he talks about DEI programs that are being instituted by the state of Missouri, Brad. I believe he's on at 7:20 on Wake Up Springfield this morning.
I thought we got away with that or got rid of that, no?
That who got rid of it?
I thought we got rid of the DEI stuff, no?
Oh, and see, that's Scott's whole point, Brad, is that you would think that Missouri government got rid of DEI for all the bluster that Republicans have had. But as Scott Faughn says, DTAR, don't trust any Republican.
Okay, on to number two.
Up a notch to number two.
St. Louis Post-Dispatch's Blythe Bernard and Josh Renaud had a piece that came out yesterday that you might have seen headlines about, Brad. St. Louis school districts lose nearly 11,000 students over 5 years. So if you look at districts, and I should point out that these reporters did the hard work of going through the data. If you look at districts in St. Louis City, St. Louis County, St. Charles County, and Jefferson County, and you look at the number of students that have been lost from enrollment, it's about 11,000. Now, I'll call out a couple data points here, Brad. The Francis Howell School District has lost 1.7% of its enrollment in the last 5 years. Fort Zumwalt, 5.8% in the last 5 years. So you can go through, you can scroll through the chart here. And of course, the reporters go through and try to find out reasons why this happened. The most common reasons are a decade ago, enrollment numbers started to drift down based on the dearth of population growth. So in other words, there was not a population boom, and I started to say fertility. Reproduction, I guess you could say, was decreasing, and starting about 10 years ago. But also, of course, Brad, with COVID, we had more and more people after COVID deciding to homeschool and look at private schools as well. However, the folks from the Post-Dispatch have pointed out that some private school numbers in the area have pointed out that their numbers have decreased as well. Interestingly, Brad, before we discuss it, Hazelwood School District showed only a 0.5% decrease in students. And in fact, they're just about where they were pre-pandemic. Other school districts have grown. Ladue is up 3.1% in enrollment. Lindbergh is up 2.0%. And enrollment. So, this caused a lot of alarm, at least on the social medias yesterday, of a lot of navel gazing and hand wringing about what is happening here. Of course, the decline of schools in the city is a factor that a lot of folks point to.
Can I give you my read on what's going on in St. Charles County? You mentioned about Francis Howell and Fort Zumwalt. I think that's because the population continues to move west, because if you look at what's going on in Wentzville, if they have that number, I know Wentzville's got to be way up, because once upon a time, Wentzville had one high school. I believe they have 3 or 4 now. And what's happening is, and you see this, St. Charles was the original place where people settled in St. Charles County, and then you had further west St. Peters, and further down you had Darden Prairie and Cottleville and places like that. Some of those areas are in Francis Howell, so there was a growth spurt there going back 20, 30, 40 years ago. Then it got further west, which would have been the Zumwalts, because once upon a time there was only Zumwalt, one high school. Now there's 4, and I think it's because the people that moved out there, they've raised their kids. And I know for the subdivision I used to live in, that's exactly what's happened. A lot of the people that moved in that subdivision, there's quite a few people in my old subdivision who were the original homeowners who bought the house, they raised their kids, but they're still living there, and they don't have kids anymore. So in other words...
Yeah. And so not to interrupt, Brad, but it was pointed out in here that Wentzville is one of the districts that have that have exceeded their pre-pandemic enrollment, and those districts are Bayless, Ladue, Lindbergh, Orchard Farm, Pattonville, and Rittner of all districts, U City, and Wentzville.
Well, you know what? The interesting thing with Pattonville, Rittner, is that area, that I don't know if you call that Northwest St. Louis County.
I mean, it's not North County, and people like to claim it as North County. It's not really North County, but Northwest County.
Right, Northwest County. That's had sort of a rebirth. There's a lot of good things going on in that area. You know, a lot of people make fun. You know, here we go again with the Delmar divide. Anything north of Delmar is the ghetto, but that's not the truth. Okay, last but not least, number one, and John's already told us he's going to insult some people on this one.
The number one.
Brad, have you ever seen an overweight old lady and a tub of guacamole?
I've not seen that, John.
I thought maybe you were going to talk about one of your YouTube creations that you've done with AI. But no, Brad. Last week, after we get off the air, one of the headlines over the weekend, brought to us by the great Tony Bateo of Tony's Kansas City, the great Claire McCaskill was on MSNBC, and she was talking about how terrible things are going to be under Donald Trump. You know, the world's going to hell in a handbasket under Donald Trump. And one of the things that you must prepare for, Brad, $10 avocados. Now, you're not a big avocado guy, are you?
If it's fresh fruit, I don't buy it.
Wow, is that right?
Yeah.
So you only buy rotten fruit?
I only buy rotten fruit. I go to...
Okay, that makes sense. You're a big composter.
I go to Friedman's Railroad Salvage.
I go to Overland Dairy Thrift Market. That's where I get all my food. But Claire McCaskill was on MSNBC because, of course, and she was talking about how terrible tariffs are going to be. And she had a fantastic quote, which is she said, you know, I love my frickin' guacamole. Avocados are going to go to $10 a piece. She also said that some days, Brad, she would like to take a bath in guacamole. Would you join her in a bathtub, Brad? Would you do like kind of the Kathy Bates hot tub thing? Would you hop in a steaming pile of guacamole with Claire?
John, no and no and no.
Wow. So somebody's being kind of ageist over here, or maybe sizist.
First off,
Brad, let's get to the point real quick before we dunk on anybody. $10 an avocado. You think that's going to happen?
You know, this crazy stuff. I mean, aren't avocados only grown in California? Isn't that the deal?
I guess the ones that we get are imported. You mean in the United States where they?
Yeah, I thought avocados was a crop that was unique to California or something.
Yeah,
like that.
I don't think you can grow it anywhere else in the United States, but you can grow it in other countries.
Oh yeah, but imported. But you know, I don't know. You know, this whole crazy thing. You know, I get into weird things. I go down to weird little rabbit holes, and I did more research on shipping, container shipping, and stuff like that. Pretty fascinating stuff as far as the vegetables and the fruits and things like that. All sorts of weird things you'd never even think about when they ship these things from these other foreign countries. How they ripen them in certain places, and I mean, it was interesting, and to the point where once again, not to diverge from what you're saying, foreign countries. Okay, you would think that if it cost you $20 to mail a package from St. Louis to Chicago, you would think it would cost a huge amount of money to ship something from Singapore to the United States. You know what I'm saying? But yet,
yeah, but cheap labor and economies of scale.
But that's the whole point. It's the whole cheap labor aspect. And look, not dunking on my union buddies, because I have union friends, and once upon a time I was in 2 different unions. But there comes a point when you demand so much money, you price yourself out of existence. You know what I'm saying?
I do know exactly what you're saying. Yeah, Brad.
I mean, look at what's going on with the cars. You know, with the price of the cars. Yeah, the UAW workers all got a nice raise in pay, but guess who's going to pay for that? And same thing with Boeing. All the machinists got a nice raise in pay, but guess what? The airlines have to buy those planes, which are going to cost more. Which means, guess what? The tickets we buy are going to cost more, right? So we're paying for it, right?
Yeah, and then you're going to squelch demand, and it's just a vicious cycle.
Right. And it's, you know what? I've always wanted to be. There are certain degrees I've always wanted. I've always wanted to have an economist degree because.
Oh yeah.
I always find these guys who get on TV and radio who are the economists, and they give you these interesting views on things that you go, I never thought of that. Because it's all I guess it's because of my fascination with the law of unintended consequences. Because so many times the economists bring up these law of unintended consequences. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do. And also, Brad, you have a fascination with psychology. So when you think about what an incremental price increase will do to consumer behavior, that plays right into psychology.
Right, exactly. Okay, we're running along on this break, or this set, so we have to move on. And by the way, we do this show live. I didn't mention that at the beginning of the show. I should have done that. 7 to 8 o'clock Central Time. We're on Central Standard Time every single day, Monday through Friday. You can listen online. You can go to bjshow.co. You can go to egbert.com. The link's right there on the page. Or you can listen off air at 104.5.
Thanks for checking out the Brad and John Show podcast. This segment of the show is brought to you by John Combest's book, Stalking, Harassment, Internet Trolling, A Guide to Recovering and Rebuilding After Online Attacks. It's a great reference if you've ever been the unfortunate target of a social media attack. It's available on Amazon. Just search John Combest. That's C-O-M-B-E-S-T. John Combest, and the book will show up in your search results. Now it's time for another segment of the Brad and John Show. Can you handle it?